welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Josh Berger.
And I'm Brian Lomax. And today, Josh and I are going to talk about how to get prepared for 2021. It's, as we're recording this, it's middle to the end of November. The ATP Tour finals are going on in London. And that's often a signal that the pro season is winding down. But for many of us who are involved at tennis at an amateur level or college or high school, there really is no off season. We're always training to a certain extent. And so using the end of the year as a milestone is probably the best way for us to get prepared for 2021. And so today what we're going to do is actually talk about how we review 2020 in preparation for setting ourselves up for a great 2021. And I think it's important that we do take the time to do a year-end review or a season review just to realize everything that's gone on. And as Josh and I were talking, Josh, you had some great ideas about kind of how to start that whole process.
Yeah, I think a great place to start is actually just by looking at your calendar. Some people keep a digital calendar, on their phones or computers. Others, something that's written by hand. But just taking a look back or a flip back, and taking a look at where you were at in January of this year. Remembering what you were doing on a day-to-day basis. Of course, our lives have changed drastically this year with the global pandemic. But I think it's important to look back and almost refresh our memory on some of the milestones and accomplishments from the last year, even considering the many challenges that society has faced and most people have faced accordingly. So I would say by start the calendar is often a great place to start.
Yeah, and I think you also had mentioned, go through your photos over the course of the year. That's another great reminder. I mean, everybody has, photos on their phones or whatever, and just kind of scroll through and see everything that has gone on. It had obviously been a very different year this year. So I do think that's a great place to begin. I think, and you mentioned this, thinking about the different accomplishments that you've had this year. So I came up with some things I think that people could use almost like as a framework to go through the year, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. So several years ago, I used a program from Darren Hardy. So Darren Hardy at the time was the publisher of Success magazine, and he had this really cool book that you could use. It was called The Best Year Ever, something like that, Best Year of Your Life. And the beginning of it, though, was all about reviewing the past year. And so I thought some of the best ideas from that were listing out your accomplishments. So, even though maybe, again, this wasn't the greatest year for everybody, that doesn't mean you didn't accomplish things. So you might want to think about, hey, what were maybe 5 or 10 things that I accomplished? And I know, we can give some examples from our own lives, Josh, as we go through some of this year-end review, because I think maybe where we started off in January, our vision may have been completely different than where we are, today near the end of 2020. I think another cool one to think about is, what are the 10 greatest things that happened to you this year? And again, using your calendar and using photos might be a really great way to sort of prompt you to think about that. What's the best decision you made this year? I think that'd be interesting to look at. What were some of the biggest lessons that you learned this year? What were the maybe biggest improvements that you had? That could be tennis, could be in your mental game, maybe strength and conditioning. We're going to get into this a little bit more later, but in terms of your performance team, who are the greatest influences on you? And that could be, of course, your performance team, but it might also be maybe some books that you read or products that you used or whatever, articles. They may have influenced you. What's one word that sums up your year last year or this year?
I like that.
And I think that's also something, hey, could we come up with, as we talk about 2021, what's maybe a phrase or mantra that we could use, right? So we'll maybe talk about that. what are some things that you would do differently if you could go back? So I think those are all like some really good ways of looking at 2020 in a more positive fashion, because I think, I don't know, if you watch media or whatever, there's a lot of sort of, 2020 worst year ever or whatever. But we all lived through it. We've all made it, survived. Can we somehow, put a more positive spin? So, you know, of those sort of ideas, Josh, are there any that pop out for you as like being really interesting that like just made you think of something?
Yeah, I would say there's definitely a couple, and I love that list. I would say one of the biggest ones is your influences. So that might be the people that you're surrounding yourself with, either the people that you interact with on a daily basis. Could be, as you mentioned, the books that you're reading, the podcasts you're listening to, the products you're consuming, whatever it may be. And I'm sure many of our listeners have heard that you are the average of the five people you spend the most amount of time with. And I think that certainly rings true. And I think from a tennis perspective, we talk a lot about forming your team. And at the professional level or the elite level, it often that team often involves the family, the coach, a sports psychology professional, maybe a strength and conditioning coach, physio, and maybe other members as well. But thinking and having an intentional approach to creating that team and to making sure that everyone on that team has that same goal in mind, and that things are flowing well between that entire team is certainly important. So I think the influences is definitely important. Also, I would say thinking about a mantra, or a single word or phrase that sums up the last year, and also going into next year, maybe a certain phrase or word that you want to refer to as an intention to live by. um, I can speak personally. This past year is trying to sort of push the envelope a little bit more, and do bigger things in certain regards. And there's actually a quote by a rapper that I like, Eminem. Life's too short to not go for broke,
Mm-hmm.
is the quote, which resonated with me for whatever reason, and sort of a constant reminder to put it all out on the table, and to go for it. And well, I know we've talked about reminders a little bit in past episodes, and how to be reminded of goals and intentions and mantras and these sorts of things. But I actually use my cell phone and just have a daily, once a day. I think it was from Siri, me telling Siri, can please remind me at such and such time each day. And it just I get that notification each and every day, and of the countless notifications I get, that one for whatever reason resonates with me, and it sort of reminds me of where I want to be heading, and the way I want to be living and leading my life. So
Yeah.
those are definitely two that resonated with me. A question that I have is, as we reflect on the last year, and I know we want to, certainly have a positive spin, and a positive perspective, because I think even on a very challenging year, there always is that silver lining. How can we learn from our personal experiences from this past year, in order to give ourselves the best chance for success, and whatever that means going forward.
Yeah, and I think maybe another process that we can go through, and this is often done in business contexts, um, is going through like that stop, start, continue
Yep.
review. And and so for those of us who don't know what that is, stop, start, continue is looking at, all right, what are some things I need to stop doing? What are some things I need to start doing? And what are some things that I should continue to do? And I think that that's a helpful exercise, especially when you break it down into maybe a little bit more granular perspective. So I did this with a soccer team a few years ago. They actually had reached the final of their conference championship. So it was a successful season for them. They hadn't actually even made their conference tournament in years. The coach's job was on the line. He knew it was on the line. Um, and it was my first year working with that team. And so what I wanted to capitalize on sort of the good feeling that the team had, and we went through this stop, start, continue, and we broke it down into physical training, strength and conditioning, mental training, game plan, and tactics. And so all the players had to fill out that stop, start, continue, and then we kind of put it into one big document and then went over it with the coaches. And yeah, of course, there were some things in there that they may have dismissed, but there were also some things in there that were surprising and good for the team and helped them shape what they were going to do in their off-season training, as
Yep.
well as what they were going to do for the next season. So I think that's a great way to kind of look back at your year and think about, all right, what are knowing some of the habits that I have today, like, all right, if I, maybe my diet isn't the best. Not, I need to stop maybe having so much sugar or that type of thing. And need to start doing other things. So I think that's a good way to not just have a positive spin, right, on the past year, but to realistically look at, all right, I want to try to become the best player I can become. That's going to be part of my vision um, going forward. So, in order to do that, can I break some things that I'm already doing down into these three categories? Have you done that type of exercise, Josh?
Yeah, yes. So certainly I think it can some, doing exercises like that can certainly be illuminating for
Hmm.
for each individual on a team and also for the team as a whole. Where I think maybe if an individual is feeling uneasy about their own performance in one of those areas, and then they break it down as a group and they see, hey, other members of the team are feeling this exact same way about nutrition, right? Maybe as a team we need to be a little bit more diligent with our nutrition, or maybe people are getting off track a little bit on off the court or off the field or whatever it may be,
Yeah.
in terms of in terms of nutrition, in terms of our sleep, in terms of whatever it may be. So I think it can be very helpful to reflect and to learn from that experience. Absolutely, I think the continue piece is a key there, because as we talked about, we don't want to just gloss over any negatives. We want to, in my view, we want to highlight the positive. We want to, especially the year of 2020, we want to break it all down and take an honest look and then remind ourselves of those positives throughout the year. You mentioned the 10 greatest things that happened over the past year, the best decision that you made over that year. So it's not about lying to ourselves or seeing the world through rose-colored glasses. It's about simply noticing and pointing out those positives throughout the past year,
Yeah.
and the having a clear intention to continue them. And I think also writing it down, the very act of writing down a goal or an intention, such as continuing a particular behavior or action, makes you much more likely to adhere to it. I think the research would certainly suggest that, and that's certainly something that I suggest with athletes when talking to them about writing down goals, about whenever comfortable sharing those goals with some trusted people in terms of being more likely to adhere to them. I know we can talk a little bit more about goals broadly, but I think it's important as we look towards next year and 2021, that that goals are not just talked about or thought about as resolutions often are. Oh, I want to lose 30 pounds, or I want to go to the gym 4 times a week, or I want to get straight A's, but that they're actually written down and broken down systematically. And I think that writing down process, and that, as you said, that start, stop, continue process can really make a huge difference.
I think actually the whole year in review should be written down. And
Yep.
when we talk about doing something like this, it's not necessarily something you're going to do in 5 minutes. I think
Sure.
you have to carve out some time to do it, and maybe it's at 1 to 2 hours for the year end review. And then the goal setting is probably 2+ hours, to figure out your plan and some of the other things that we'll get into. But even though, this is a longer type of thing, when I think about this year, everything that's gone on, and like say where I was in January, February, I mean, for me, like things were going great. Business was good. I was looking forward to a great college tennis season, working with different teams. And then, beginning of March, everything sort of like every day, just sort of like, all right, well, that match has now been canceled. Now the whole season's canceled and everything. And so, like, when I look back on this year, I think my kind of word for the year is evolution. I've had to kind of evolve and pivot and do different things. I think us creating this podcast,
Yep.
great decision, I would say, on our part to do it. I'm extremely happy about that. But this wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the pandemic. And so in that regard, hey, I can look at the silver lining of all of that. Even us beginning the USPTA New England Sports Psychology Committee wouldn't have happened if it weren't for those things. So even in the kind of the light of supposed negative events, can we find the benefit? Can we find the silver lining in these things, so that we can move forward? Because it's not always all terrible. I do think, when we think about what we could do differently, that's a realistic look back. That means, hey, I maybe could have done this a little bit better. So I think that's good. Um, so I would say let's make sure that we're carving out some time that we don't gloss over the year-end review and just go straight to goals. Everybody wants to look forward and set goals, but I think it's really important for that each of us recognize what we accomplished this year. Because I think that, from a sports psychology perspective or just a psychology perspective, it helps us develop some confidence, and it helps us also think about, all right, look how far I've come. Am I better than I was in January? Hopefully we can all say that we are. That, this year, obviously a little bit different because there was a gap for many of us, but hopefully we've recovered from that and that our games have continued to grow. And so that develops some confidence. It makes us feel like we've got, some self-efficacy, like we are capable of doing things. And so I think we don't want to gloss over that part. I think it's really important to recognize how far we've come. And then, all right, now we want to go to that next level.
Absolutely, and I think being able to look at it all on paper, and look at those accomplishments throughout the year really helps to show how far you've come. As does looking back at your calendar and seeing some of these milestones throughout the last 11 months or 12 months. The other thing that came to mind as you were talking is this concept of adversity and overcoming adversity, and that process making us stronger. With a lot of the tennis players I've talked to, they obviously we had the shared experience of working with college teams during that process, and in mid-March, the entire season coming to an end. But with some junior players as well as adult players who had a slate of USTA tournaments that they were planning to play that were canceled, whether that's at the regional level, the national level, international level. It's also very challenging when they have certain ranking goals or rating goals or whatever it may be, or they're trying to maybe make it onto a college team or be recruited by coaches. So being able to, as you said, evolve and be flexible. I remember in one of our past episodes, we talking with Jeff Barrup and Tim Donovan, talking about during that college recruiting process that the players that were thinking outside the box and being flexible and sending out videos to coaches about the training that they continued doing during the pandemic were often looked at very favorably. So I think I would agree that in my own personal life, and I've had a lot of changes as well this year, and a lot of new opportunities, exciting opportunities, including this podcast, which has really been very excited that we started this, and as you said, would not have happened without the pandemic. But I think as we all look back, we can all take solace and take comfort in the ways that we've adapted and changed and made the best of a challenging situation. When life stopped and things had to go virtual, taking businesses virtual, taking relationships virtual at times, whatever it may be. But being able to adapt and adjust and handle the adversity of 2020, I think is should be thought of as a bright spot.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. So now that we've kind of covered the review of 2020 and looked at it realistically, but also positively with a good spin on that, and we perhaps have a better understanding of what we want to stop, start, and continue, then it becomes time to look at, okay, what do we want to do in 2021?
Yep.
And so when you start like a goal setting process, Josh, how do you think of it? How do you break it down for people and help them develop a plan?
Yeah, well, generally the way I would start is just by breaking down a goal into pieces. So starting with a larger goal that we would refer to as an outcome goal, oftentimes, and then breaking that down into performance and process pieces beneath that. So thinking about, maybe that goal is, let's just say, getting a college scholarship for a junior athlete, or maybe for an adult USTA player, it's competing in a certain number of national tournaments or achieving certain ranking or whatever it may be for that particular person. But then breaking that into performance goals that would have to be attained. Maybe that means you have to make improvements with your serve, or improvements with aspects of your mental game, or your sleep, or whatever it may be, and then um, into smaller process goals that make those possible. So I start with that process, that breaking it down and having each person define those goals for themselves. I'm certainly of the view that when one creates their own goals for themselves and they're not imposed by their sports psychology professional or their coach or their parents, that they're more likely to adhere to those goals, and that those goals are more important and meaningful for them. So breaking it down into those outcome, performance, and process pieces, but also trying to utilize the SMART goal framework in terms of making sure that goals are specific, that they can be easily measured, that they're attainable without being overly unrealistic, um, that they're realistic, that they're realistic and not as we talked about. I think the A and the R in SMART get a little bit work together a little bit here, and then timely, and then they have a clear time. So I break it down into that SMART goal framework, and then through the outcome, performance, and process goals. How do you start breaking down goals when you work with athletes?
I think it's very similar, Josh, but I think I would like maybe have one process inserted, and this may not resonate with everybody, but I like, let's say, um, you want to be number one in New England.
Yep.
All right. The process that I would insert in there is having you understand who you need to be as a tennis player in order to achieve that. And the way I like to think of it is in terms of your physical game, your conditioning, your mental game, maybe your character. And then having people write sentences like, all right, if I'm going to be, number one in New England, then, you know, my serve is going to be a weapon that helps me get more free points.
Yep.
I'm going to be, an all court aggressive player who uses his forehand to force more errors. And it's just a way of kind of like developing this vision of the game that you'd like to play, like that you see yourself playing. And
Yep.
and a way to understand this in some ways is like, all right, if I want to be a number one player in New England, or achieve some other goal, what do other people who have achieved that goal, what do they look like? What do they do? And it can help you begin to kind of craft your vision of who you need to be in order to get there. And then I think the who you need to be can then start to drive a lot of the performance and process goals that we can then be working on. And then finally, I think this is where we'll end up at one point here is can you begin taking all of that down to your routines and actions and discrete action steps? Because that's really where the magic happens. It's great to have a plan, but if you don't actually put it into action, then it's not doing anything for you. It's just gathering dust,
Yep.
right? And so I like to think of it as I've done this in like different columns. So, sort of in the left-hand column, we write out the vision, then we've got the performance goals, the process goals, and then the habits and the action steps. And it's, that process goes from left to right, but the achievement process actually goes from right to left. You just focus on your actions and your habits, and it'll help you achieve your process goals and your performance goals and hopefully get to that vision. And you made a point, I think, earlier about even if you have a plan, there has to be adjustments along the way. You have to be doing some course corrections. Things change, as we have seen, and so you might have to make some adjustments. Sometimes you can't be doing some of the things that you were doing earlier. Now you have to do some other things. So I think that's a big part of it. So I think I think we're basically in line with each other. I think it's for me. I like to have that vision piece of who do I want to be, and I actually think of that, Josh, also as an outcome, right? Even though we might have stated our goal as a particular ranking, and that is certainly an outcome. But me becoming that player is also an outcome, and defining it at a different level. And I've found that has been a pretty good way for people to go a little bit deeper on their development. Because I think if like we left tennis players on their own to do this, we'd get probably 90%, if not more, of the work done on their physical game, and that's it.
Hmm.
But I think it's important to consider your conditioning. You've mentioned sleep a couple of times, right? It's important to make sure that your physical energy, things that go into that, sleep, nutrition, hydration, are
Hmm.
a part of that. Your mental game is a part of that. That your character as a person is a part of that development plan. And many of the activities that we come up with are probably going to help feed all of those areas or feed multiple of those areas. Um, so, what are your thoughts on that? Like, kind of maybe adding in a vision of who you want to be.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a great point. I think I think once a player has a clear identity for where they see themselves currently and where they want to head, then they have a clear direction. And as you said, then some of these other steps, like where your goals lie and what those smaller pieces in terms of your routines and those process goals and those daily actions become a lot clearer. So I would agree that by starting at that point, it makes the entire process a lot easier. Um, because and we talked about in a very recent episode about motivation and finding your why. But once you have that identity and how you see yourself, if you want to be number one in New England, that requires you to go about things in a certain way on a day-to-day basis. And having that very clear identity of who you need to become makes those other pieces start to fall in line. Where, okay, if I want to become the best player in the region, that means I can't be spending all this time on my phone doing whatever. I need to be focused on a day-to-day basis on these things that take my game to that next level.
Yeah.
So I would agree that starting with a little bit deeper and digging a little bit deeper at the start makes the rest of the work a bit easier and makes it a little bit clearer for where the rest of those goals lie.
Yeah. And so let's say, we're working with a player and because I think there are different people who should be involved in the goal planning process, right? I think you'd probably agree with that. But let's say we're working with them on the mental and emotional skills. Are there, knowing, what you know about tennis players, what might be some of the prompts that you would give them in terms of like, all right, how what are the different things that you'd want them to maybe be thinking about setting some goals on in terms of improving these mental skills going forward? Are there any that kind of jump out at you as being like the most important things?
I would start with practice. I would start with how you practice, what's your daily energy in practice, bringing a certain level of consistency to practice so there's not a huge range in where your energy is at, where your focus is at on a day to day basis. I would also, we talk about character and, behavior, starting on the court and off the court. I would think about, getting a little bit deeper into the performance side, where you're at point by point. So making sure that you have some sort of routine or some sort of ritual that you can go to in between points to set yourself up for the following one. So I would say, yeah, I would sort of start, bigger picture as we talked about, and sort of get smaller and smaller and more granular as I break that down. How about you?
Yeah, I think that those are good things. Let's go back to the practice one because that's really important, right? We want to make sure that we practice the same way that we're going to compete,
Yep.
right? Because if we're not practicing at that level, then we're going to compete at that sort of lower level. And maybe this is another aspect of goal setting is working on daily goal setting
Yep.
for those practices to make sure that we're getting as much as we can out of each practice day. So I think that's good. I love the routines piece. So that's going to be helping with focus. We talked a lot about that in some previous episodes. Um, Having that full focus, being in the moment, focusing on like what's important now, those types of things. Um, I think we could, more generally think about, all right, how do we develop more confidence or develop confidence as a skill?
Hmm.
In our last episode, we talked with, Steve Walker about the confidence journal. I know that that was like one thing that you really liked from that episode. That's something I think would be a great thing to, work on is, can we become a more confident player? Can I trust my shots more under pressure? So maybe that's the vision. Like I will be trusting my shots more under pressure this year, or in big moments. Okay, well, how do we work on that? Maybe we get it all the way down to something like a confidence journal. So I think focus, confidence are really two important things, and then making sure that we bring that level of motivation and goal setting to practice is really good. Um, who else should be involved in the goal setting process?
Um, I, I would say the coach. I would say that the coach should be involved. Maybe not in necessarily. Um, well, I would say yeah. I would say that the coach should definitely be involved in forming the goals, and if there's an adjustment, that they should at least be involved in that process. The parents, if it's a junior athlete, should be on board, and everyone should be speaking the same language, so to speak,
Yeah.
in terms of being on the same page with that process. Maybe if an athlete has I would also say it depends to a certain extent on what those goals are. So if a athlete's goals have to do with nutrition, maybe there's some sort of outside nutritionist that is part of the team that needs to be a part of that goal setting process as well. An expert in that field that can provide some unique insight into, from a nutrition perspective, what needs to be done to perform at a high level.
Yeah, and
So
probably the
yeah,
same on the strength and conditioning side as well,
yep, exactly.
right? As the player becomes even more serious. But even still, I mean, that could be someone my age. That doesn't mean I can't get involve a coach,
Yep.
a strength and conditioning person, a sports psych. I think it's always good to have coaches. Um, I think perhaps also players, especially those at the adult level, they should not, if they're working with a particular coach, or they're taking lessons, they should raise their expectations in my mind that their coach actually has a plan for developing their game.
Yep.
And that's true at the junior level as well. And this is where I think the USTA actually has some really great resources. So USTA Player Development has a nice template for a player development plan. And we'll put a link to that in our show notes. And Francisco Montoya, who's the director of the academy at Manchester Athletic Club, the MAC Academy there, he did a really nice talk about this plan, and we'll link to that webinar that he did. It was part of the USTA New England Pro Power Series last spring. And he essentially went through a plan that had been produced for a player who trained at the MAC Academy, and then went on to do extremely well at a very high level Division One tennis program. And so I think it's good to have that understanding. And the nice thing about that plan, Josh, is it does look at the team holistically. It asks you to list out, everybody who's involved with the player, and it looks at different types of goals, but it also helps prioritize things. And so it's really just, I think, a nice document that can help the whole performance team come around and have a shared understanding of what we're trying to do. So I think that's a really a great resource that players, in a way, if they don't have that from their coach, they should demand that in a nice way, of course. But I think that really should be a part of what they do. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree. I think having a coach who has a clear vision, who's been through it before, either on a personal level, on a coaching level, but also, as you said, is able to break it down into the various aspects of the game: the strength and conditioning piece, the technical portion, the mental portion, any other portions, and breaks it down, utilizing some of the resources that are already out there through USTA. And I think our listeners can certainly get a lot of value through that resource, and can I think spending a little bit of time and taking an honest look at things, and laying out what is your team, and how can you make improvements in these various areas, and having that development plan, that a coach, I would agree that a coach should be guiding that process, and the parents, if it's a junior athlete, might be involved in that process, or if with an adult athlete, any other coaches that they're utilizing, might be involved in that process. I would say ought to be involved in that process. So yeah, I think it's about knowing that those resources are out there for coaches, and utilizing them.
Yeah, and actually, taking a look at the USTA player development site, they actually have their own website separate from just USTA.com. They've done a lot of great updates in the last year, so there's a ton of awesome resources and information there for both coaches, players, and others. So we mentioned earlier the idea of goal setting for practices. So USTA Player Development does have a copy of their journal there, which can help you not only set goals for practices, but also set goals for matches,
Yep.
match evaluations, etc. So that could be, when we start to commit to some new habits for the next year, perhaps something like that kind of reflection or goal setting could be one of the things that's out there. And this is an easy way to get started. Free PDF to get you going. When you think of maybe some habits, Josh, that maybe some habits that have helped you, maybe as a player or even as a tennis professional or a sports psych professional, are there any things that that have helped you over the last few years that could maybe help some of the listeners as well?
I would say meditation. I would say meditation's a huge one, that I sort of got into in college a bit, and more so during my master's program, and I would say more so increasingly as the years have gone on. And it's still, I mean, fully transparently, it's still something that I am working on the best ways to do, more and more consistently, to bring it into my, some form of that mindfulness practice into my life on a daily basis, where I find that at times I'm quite consistent about doing it daily, and at other times I have a tougher time with that. But I would say that is definitely a practice that I would say has led to some clarity in my life. Has also led me to be able to slow down and simply take a deep breath when needed. Maybe more during more challenging moments, or maybe when I have a lot going on, just to be able to um, think a little bit more clearly, to focus, to regulate my emotions. I think it really has a whole host of benefits. Actually, at one point, I'll share this. At one point during the summer, my brother and I were in a great routine of calling each other at 9 a.m. daily and doing a 10-minute headspace or one of the other app meditation, putting it on speakerphone through the computer and doing it from I was in Connecticut at the time, he was in Massachusetts, and doing that on a daily basis, I would say definitely brought a lot of value to me and to my life. And maybe don't do it as consistently as I'd like, but definitely find that has is one daily habit that um, has brought and continues to bring a lot of value into my life. Um,
I like that because also you with your brother, you kind of had like an accountability partner, right? You partnered up on it, and maybe that increases the motivation or the adherence to the
Absolutely.
to the habit, which is cool. And that might be something that everybody can think about is can I recruit somebody to do this with me?
Yep. Right.
So because
Yeah.
it can be hard to do it all on our own.
Absolutely. I think having somebody else who maybe has a shared goal or a shared, as part of that same journey and working together on holding each other accountable and, reminding each other. And if one person doesn't feel like meditating on that day, you can sort of push the other person. I think that accountability piece is huge in adhering to whatever goals that is, whether it's
Yeah.
whether it's something like mindfulness, whether it's even something like diet, whatever. I think exercise. I think that adherence definitely increases when there's some accountability there.
Yeah, yeah. I think for me, probably the thing that's been maybe the most life changing was years ago when I took a class in positive psychology. I think this is like 2010. We were encouraged to take this character um, based strength survey. It's called Values in Action. And I think the website's like viacharacter.org. I don't know if you've ever taken that, but it's free, um, basically strengths assessment. And it's measured on like these 24 different character strengths. And the idea is to look at your top five and then see how you can use your top five more in your life, right? As a way of helping you be happier, lead a more fulfilling, meaningful life. And so my top one ended up being um, love of learning. So I was like, all right, how do I, develop some habits around that? Because obviously I like it. So I developed two habits. This more was when I was commuting. So I would read for some nonfiction book for 30 minutes a day, but also when I was driving, I would listen to audiobooks, sort of nonfiction audiobooks. So um, those two habits, really maybe combined into one, have made a huge difference just in my knowledge of sports psychology, other different aspects of things, um, and I can remember just like certain books that I listened to and like the points that I got out of that, um, and it just fed into a strength of mine. So it wasn't like, oh, I hate learning, I hate reading. It was like, let me do this and sort of take it to the next level, because I think even in the car it was a way to take some maybe unproductive time and turn it into something more productive for me. So I used to, I think, probably listen to sports radio. A lot of toxic stuff, especially in the Boston area. When it comes to sports radio, there's not a lot of positivity there. And so I ditched all that and basically went to audiobooks and now more mixing in podcasts as well. So I try to do, get to, now that I don't drive so much because we're so kind of still mostly at home. I try to make sure at least to get 30 minutes a week of an audiobook and a few different podcasts. But I'm definitely doing the 30 minutes a day of nonfiction reading. And that's just really, I don't know, helped me develop a lot of different things. And so I think it could be easy as that. It doesn't have to be 30 minutes. So, I could say, well, make it 5 minutes, 10 minutes, just as an easy way to get started. 30 minutes might be too much for someone. And I think as, we look to help people understand about habits, don't say like, all right, I'm going to do an hour of meditation. Break it down into something you can do.
Yep.
Um, because then otherwise you're going to feel like a failure for not being able to keep up with your routine. But if you can do 5 minutes of meditation or 5 minutes of being mindful every day, then maybe you begin to carve out some more space for it as you see the benefits.
Absolutely. No, I definitely agree on that point. I think, whether it's something like meditation, having trying to start a new habit, and starting too big, where you use the meditation example. Let's say somebody wants to start running or jogging, and they say, okay, I haven't ran in 10 years. I'm going to start today and I'm going to run 5 miles. That's very daunting for
Yeah.
just about everybody who hasn't ran in a long time. And with a routine that you want to get started with, you want to start small. You want to start to master being able to do it on a consistent basis, and you can then from there you can start increasing from there. Maybe you start with a mile, or maybe you set expectations low and you say, I'm gonna, I just want to get out, 3 times this week, and it doesn't matter how much I run or jog or walk during that time, but I want to make sure that I get out 3 times, and jog or try to jog 3 times. Um, I also really like the point that you made about, you know, a strength that you had, that love of learning, and um, building on it. Where I think a lot of people fall into the trap, I would say, of focusing on their weaknesses, and it's always about improving their weaknesses. Maybe it's a tennis player and they have a weaker backhand than their forehand, and they're constantly, I need to get better at my backhand. I need to get better at my backhand, and they almost forget about their forehand that wins them, the vast majority of points. And continuing to, yes, well, there is a time for working on weaknesses and working on, areas that we want to bring up to a solid level. But there's also certainly a lot of benefit to continuing to build on strengths, realizing what makes you successful, and continuing to um, improve on that skill set, and build on that skill set. So I really like that point. Um, yeah, I would say also, the reading piece is, whatever, if you have, and this is something I definitely suggest to athletes. If you, for instance, a golfer I was working with, golfers don't have, especially in the Northeast New England area, don't have the luxury of tennis players, of being able to continue to play their sport year round in an indoor sense. But maybe they can go to the driving range, or do some other things, but they're shut down for a period of time. So continuing to think of ways where they can improve during these winter months. Maybe that has to do with imagery and visualization. Maybe it has to do with reading. Maybe it's reading a book about one of the all-time greats, or about the mental aspects of the sport. But I think doing something on a daily basis or on a weekly basis that wraps your head around a certain topic that you intend to take to that next level or continue improving on in the next year is a great practice, as we look forward to next year.
Yeah, and if there's a sport that has a lot of books on the mental game, it's got to be golf. I mean, I more so than I think any other sport.
Yep.
There are more, and even as tennis players, I think one of the things that we shouldn't be afraid to do is read books from other sports, because there could be a lot of great parallels. You may get some great ideas from those other sports. I know I've mentioned this in a past couple episodes. One of my favorite books that really helped me was called The Fighter's Mind.
Yep.
And not at all about tennis, but we've talked about tennis being a fighting sport, a combat sport. Really taught me a lot about that. So we can get a lot out of that. And I've read several very, very good books on the mental game in golf, and they've helped me understand a little bit more about the mental game in tennis and different things that I've tried to work on because of that, and that I had never heard before in tennis books. And so it's good to expose ourselves, and many of us have also played other sports, and we should also use some of that experience to bring into tennis from that regard.
Yeah, yeah, I've actually had the same experience. One of my favorite sports psychology books is Heads Up Baseball
Yeah.
by Ken Reviza, and all about they pitch by pitch and taking things one pitch at a time. And I think that can certainly be applied in tennis, and I think the same goes other ways. I know the book Inner Game of Tennis has, and we had Sean Brawley on recently, had a great conversation with him, and I know plenty of people who are non-tennis players who have received a lot of value from that book. So I think learning from other aspects of the field of sports psychology for athletes, or learning from other fields in general, is certainly helpful in continuing that personal development and your development as an athlete and competitor.
Yeah. So I think as people go through this goal setting process and looking at the different resources that we can make available, I think ultimately if we can get down to those habits that we want to have, um, sometimes in that last sort of piece of it's also just some discrete action steps I need to take. So I'm thinking about a few years ago where I wanted to get a certain ranking. I needed to hire a personal trainer. I don't like going to the gym and working out on my own. And so that was a key aspect. So I had to like call, set up the appointment, right? So that became part of the plan. But I think one thing we emphasized this in our episode with Jeff Barrett and Tim Donovan is the idea. I think this is key for tennis players is that they have to practice competing. We have to make sure we have at least a weekly habit around getting in some competition. And I would say, really, this is my personal perspective, that it's got to be more than just point play. At least once a week, we've got to have some set play so that we're becoming more and more in tune with the different situations that can appear in a set. Those are difficult to replicate in clinics and point play, being up a break, being down a break, closing things out, etc. And so that would be one thing that I would really want to see on everybody's plan is understand, okay, what's your plan to practice competing?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think this has been a theme in past episodes that yeah, competing in practice through through regular training with a coach, or through a junior academy or whatever it may be. Also, calling up a friend, and rather than let's just hit, or let's just play some baseline games. Let's play a set today. We both want to take that game to the next level. We know it can be more challenging to perform well when we're competing, for many people. So let's compete, and let's continue to practice that skill. So absolutely.
Yeah, I think one of the best things I ever did as a junior player was I had this one rival. He actually lived in our town, but he played at a private high school instead of our high school. But during the winter, every Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we had a contract, and we would always play a 2 out of 3 set match. And it just made the both of us better because we were sometimes he'd win, sometimes I'd win, and we just got better and better and better. And it was that nice spirit of sort of cooperative competition. We were reasonably good friends. We didn't have like a rivalry in a negative way. Um, but I look back on those days, those Wednesday afternoons. They really helped make me the player that I became. And so just having that habit was so important to my success.
Yeah, I love that. And I know I've talked a little bit about, but I used to do something similar as a kid. the club I used to train at, they used to have these Saturday night tournaments,
That's
and I
right.
would play in them almost every single week. And that, sometimes I'd do well, sometimes wouldn't do as well, but just the act of competing and playing, getting those reps in. Another thing, I used to go to this junior tennis academy for 2 summers, going into my senior year and then going into college. I went for a month each time to down in North Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and we used to play best of five setters. And the thought there, which I definitely embrace, is if you can play a 5 setter or a 4 setter, then when you're competing in the middle of the third set, it doesn't quite feel as tough. You're getting those reps in. You're seeing the fact that if you go down 3-0 in a set, it's not necessarily over. You're seeing the fact that just because you're down 5-2 or 5-3 and the other person's serving for it, that they might get tight, because that tends to happen to just about everybody, including the best players in the world. So you're gaining that experience. You're seeing all of the possibilities that can happen in a set of tennis, in a tennis match. You see that sometimes somebody will win that first set and then start off slow in that second set. So okay, this is a great chance to maybe jump on that person and start to turn this match around. So you through those experiences, you gain insight into how to better handle some of those moments that have arisen and will continue to arise in matches that you'll play. So I would totally agree that all tennis players who are competing should make that as a goal and intention for the upcoming year, to continue to work on competing as a skill, which involves practicing playing matches whenever possible.
Yeah, as well as also part of the plan should be, what is your competition schedule? And,
Yep.
and that'll certainly be something that the team works on. So I think that's been a good discussion of the different habits. So I think what we can do is, part of our show notes, put in some of these suggestions and some links to some of these other things.
Absolutely. And just as a reminder, I think we'd love to hear if you if you check out these links that are in the show notes and you gain value from it, or if you have any questions about anything, feel free to reach out to us. Our email is tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. You can always reach out to us about any particular points that we cover during the podcast, any questions that you have. And that's our show for today. Again, you can refer to the show notes for all of those links, as well as a little bit of information about this episode, as well as about the show and about us. If you have any feedback, again, you can reach out to us via email. Please subscribe to on your platform of choice, on your podcast platform of choice, which includes YouTube, and also be sure to give us a follow and follow what we're doing on Instagram. Well, thanks again, and we will talk to you soon in our next episode.